Hi.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Okay, yeah. Um, so this is the same format as the midterm paper, and this is being recorded. So when it's done, I'll send you the link in case you want to look at it.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure I got the right paper here. I think this is your paper here. Yeah, this is it.
Um, yes, that's mine.
Okay. And let me open up the final exam assignment just to remind myself what exactly it is here.
I think
So
it's on the top. I just I copy
you
and
have it there.
pasted it on
Okay.
top.
All right. So let me save this again in case we make some more changes, and I'll send it to you. So, okay. All right. So it says here. Of course, my job. I mean, one of the reasons why one of the reasons why I use this kind of format for teaching is that because I think by giving comments, people are going to think more and hopefully ponder some of the suggestions I make. So of course, when you submit the final paper, it shouldn't be longer than the text shouldn't be longer than 550 words, and that limitation requires that a person really have a clear idea of what exactly they're trying to argue, because they have to meet the word limit, right? So they have to know exactly what they're trying to state, which means that they think through their thoughts to crystallize and clarify them in order to express them as clearly and concisely and succinctly as possible. So I wrote a lot of comments because that's my job,
Yes.
is to write comments. So so you want to make sure, what did I write here?
When I went over it, I think a lot of it is that it's not. I've been using a lot of sources to fund my
Well, I mean, this is an issue for me too, because I like to, how I talk about big topics, and so, but when it comes time to write, it's really important that any claim that I make, because I have to write papers too, and I have to meet word limits too. I mean, that's part of my obligation to keep my job. Any claim I make, I have to support with evidence, and that means typically citing a scholarly source, that supports that, and of course that the same rule that I remind the students about: no more than 10% of a paper should be quoted text. That applies to me as well. I can't just quote text, so I have to put it in my own words, but I still have to cite the source. Now, that doesn't mean that a reader's necessarily going to believe me or believe you, but you have to try, right? So, U.S. has been a hegemon ever since the end of the Second World War. You're right. It has been. Another task here is, of course, to polish your already wonderful, excellent multilingual English skills, which of course is one of your great advantages and one of your great assets, is that you're multilingual and your English is probably as good as mine, if not better, because you had to actually study it. I never really had to study English because I was born with it, right? I was born speaking it. So, I mean, that's typically also a point that I make to my Korean students as well, that I think partly because the Korean language is so different from the English language, that Korean students, when they write, they have to think very, very clearly about what they're trying to say. So they have to. Since it's more difficult, they often write more concisely, right? Whereas people like you and me who are European background, English is kind of close to German and Dutch and it's got a lot of French, Latin words. So it's easy for us to just blah.
Yeah, that's true.
Because we don't have to.
It's
It's really easy, but it's not so easy for Korean students unless they've been born and raised or spent a lot of time in the U.S. or some other country. But so the U.S. has been a hegemon ever since the end of the Second World War. It has been able to spread. So again, also sentences should not be longer than 2 text lines in length. Typically, at least I know British English is different from American English. I mean, in American English, we were taught when I was a student, we were supposed to write like Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway is this American writer who was, before he became a novelist, he worked for the Kansas City Star newspaper, and newspaper reporters did write very short sentences, and so that's how he learned to write. And so his sentences are very short. So we were taught that we should write like Ernest Hemingway, shortest sentences as possible. Although British English sentences, they can be, and so of course also in terms of, as I tell all of my students, in terms of helping them learn and polish their already wonderful English, rather than me tell you how I would write it, I make suggestions, and I want the student to think about and choose how they would want to write it. And I make the suggestions, and they can adopt them, use them, adapt them, throw them out, whatever. But yeah, I mean, I was as a consequence of the pandemic and everything going online, I listened into a linguistics conference focusing on Slavic languages and on Zoom that was held somewhere in the US. And the term is ineffable. I mean, I can't tell you how I can tell you, but it's difficult for me to explain why something sounds right or better to me than but as a native speaker. But something is correct or incorrect, the term is that it's ineffable. According to, that's a term I learned from this linguistic conference on Zoom. So I understand everything you're writing, but it's just a matter of how a native speaker thinks it would sound right or better, right? So, so the U.S. has been hegemon ever since the end of the Second World War. It has been able to spread its American influence globally. So, that's up to you to choose how you want to say that. I just make some suggestions here about how you might want to state it. Either one's okay. It's just a matter of you choosing which one you like. So, the rise of communism was the biggest threat to the U.S. since the Nazi regime. So, I mean, you got to be. I mean, again, it's always important that you stick closely to the material in the textbook or any scholarly sources. I don't know if does Hook actually make that statement.
I think I made that statement because I heard you say it so often in classes. And if I wanted to make a,
or you can say the U.S. rise of communism was perceived as being the biggest threat to the USA since the Nazi regime. I mean, because I'm the one that makes that weird argument that that the Cold War was based upon mutual misperception of threat, that it was a conflict spiral. But again, the dominant view in U.S. today is that no, the Soviet Union was a threat. The U.S. didn't perceive a threat; it was a threat. So that's why I think how that caught me there. If Hook was agreeing that, yeah, I mean, sometimes Hook, he seems to be influenced by some of this debate now that the Cold War has been over for 30 years. That maybe the Cold War was based upon some elements of mutual fear rather than than the Soviet, because when I was your age, we were taught that the Soviet Union, the standard view was the Soviet Union was an aggressive power, and there were three fundamental cases that were typically introduced that supposedly proved that Stalin saw an opportunity to conquer Europe and the world. And one was the Greek Civil War, that right after World War II ended, there was a Greek uprising in the north among the Slavic-speaking population, northern Greece, by the Communist Party. And that the British put that down and with American CIA help. And another case was there was a separatist movement by the Azeri and the Kurdish groups in northern Iran, because Iran had been occupied during World War II. There was actually Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill actually met in Tehran in 1943 when they were supplying the Soviet Union through Iran, giving it supplies. And because the Shah's father, the guy that was overthrown in 1979, he was acting like he was pro-German, so they got rid of him. And it was easy to do because he was weak. We didn't have much support domestically. So and that the United States, first off, that the United States helped suppress that Greek uprising, and then the United States supposedly threatened Stalin. And Stalin, you don't back down in Iran, we're going to go to we're going to do something bad to you. And Stalin went, okay. And then also Eastern Europe, that the Soviet Union, this is right after World War II, right? The United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain were allies fighting the war. And then right at the end of World War II, the Soviet Union started doing supposedly these bad things. And so the idea was that Stalin is now moving to take advantage. So, but we know that he wasn't responsible for supporting the Greek Communist Party uprising in Greece. That was Tito. Tito did that. The Yugoslav communist leader, the insurgent leader that fought the Germans and led the Communist Party, Josip Broz Tito, who was the ruler until he died in 1980. He did that. That was his own initiative. It wasn't Stalin. It was Tito, when he was still allied with Stalin, thought he was going to, spread and unify Greece as part of this Yugoslav entity. And then, in fact, Stalin didn't withdraw from Iran because of threats. He did it because he was successfully persuaded that the United States and Britain weren't going to put some kind of CIA agent or Western or British agent that was going to threaten the Soviet Union and power in Iran when the war was over, because they had occupied Iran, during the war. And then in Eastern Europe is the last case that supposedly so the point is, the question is, and it goes back to this point, if you write the rise of communism was perceived to be the big, since the Nazi regime, I could agree with that. I think everybody agrees with that, right? The Cold War was fought globally because of two very different conflicting ideologies. Again, was it really ideologies? Who made does Hook make that statement? I don't know. I don't recall, Hook making that statement. I think Hook, he talks a bit about how that he references neorealism, and that basically they were going to be in conflict because they're the biggest powers in the world. And so it didn't really, the nature of their political systems wasn't really so primarily important. They were going to be in conflict. And that's like a typical realist argument, that it doesn't matter if it's a monarchy or a communist dictatorship or democracy or whatever. They're going to be in conflict because it's the nature of human beings and their countries that they form to desire influence for its own sake, or they act as if expanding and increasing their influence in the world for its own sake is their motivation. And so they're going to be in conflict because they want to expand their power, because that's just what humans do.
That's true.
But I don't think he really focuses upon ideology. There really wasn't that much difference in ideology between the British and the Germans leading up to World War I. They both, the Kaiser did control the military, and he did dominate foreign policy, but he wasn't all powerful. There was an elected parliament in Germany in 1914 that had to approve the budget, that had to approve the money that was going to be spent on the military. But they were still in conflict with Britain, right? And Britain was quite willing to cooperate with Russia, which was much more different ideologically than Britain. It was an autocracy, and so. That never, and the United States during World War II was allied with Soviet Union against Germany because Germany was perceived as a more serious threat. So again, just that notion, you got to be careful. And whatever statement you make, you have to support it. And if you can't find evidence in the Hook book, in the Hook textbook, to support your claim, that means you can't make the claim, or you have to change and refine and develop and sharpen the claim and make it more specific. So what does Hook say about ideology? I don't know. You could find it. I could. I have the book right here, you can use the index, and you can look up Cold War and, Cold War, bipolar institutions of power. And I just don't see he makes any statement about ideology here. I want to look under Cold War here. Right. So that's why you got to be careful. These two powers wanted to be the ruling hegemon. Again, does Hook make that statement? Okay. Okay. After the fall of the Soviet Union, China was starting to grow larger and more developed. I mean, you can make the argument, of course, that the Soviet Union, I mean, the United States has got much more in common with with China than with the Soviet Union, because China is all into capitalist trade and commerce with the rest of the capitalist world. It's been that way since the late 1970s. So, but like typically these neo-realists like John Mersheimer, they argue that, yeah, I mean, the ideology is not insignificant, but they're going to be in conflict, and there's going to be resentment and suspicion and conflict, because China's rising in power capabilities. That means it's going to want to generate influence over people's minds and behaviors in a world that's been dominated particularly since 1991 by the United States. So if you're going to shift people away from Washington to look to Beijing, the Americans are going to react badly to that. And I think he does say that. The Americans, and that's a typical realist point of view, right? That, as China becomes more powerful, it's going to want to have more influence. And that influence is going to come at the expense of the US. And the US is not going to react positively to that. They're going to try to resist, and that's going to be conflict, So, I mean, the question is, conflict is part of human nature. I mean, we have conflicts with each other. We have conflicts with our parents. We have conflicts with our friends. We have conflicts with our competitors. Conflict is not necessarily bad. It's bad when it becomes violent. That's what we don't like, because that could lead to bad things, including like nuclear war. So conflict between US and China, I mean, competition is conflict too. And, we talk about capitalism, all about competition, So, yeah, I mean, China began growing, I mean, it became basically an ally of the US by the late 1970s. And I as far as I can tell, what was going on was that, when Jimmy Carter became president in 1976, 1977, he talked about, I'm not going to focus upon Cold War and containment. The Vietnam War was a mistake, was a disaster. I'm going to focus on promoting human rights. So he was advocating human rights. And but by the end of the Carter administration, Carter had shifted back to talking in Cold War terms, partly because people who called themselves communists or said that they liked communism made some big advances in the world, even if they didn't act like, whatever that means, including in places like Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Somalia, Grenada, Nicaragua. And Carter was under all sorts of attack domestically because he was seen as, letting our guard down and letting the communists expand. So then the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan around Christmas time in 1979. And by the time, and then the elections was in 1980. By the time the election was coming around in 1980, Carter was already talking about, and he sent Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, to Beijing. And I remember Brzezinski walked along the Great Wall of China. And China even, I don't know how much Deng Xiaoping was the ruler of China at this time, how much he knew what he was doing in terms, he came and visited the United States. This was really interesting, and he opened up the economy. But the US was also restarting its containment policy, or refocusing on it, and China slipped itself in there to become a de facto ally of the US. So I remember money started going into China by the 1970s. I mean, I even had friends from high school who went over there and became business people in the 1970s in China. I think a lot of these people were like missionaries. Like there was a guy who was these Mennonites that have been kidnapped in Haiti. These people, these missionaries, are kidnapped in Haiti a few weeks ago, and now they're trying to get them out. He was one of those people. He was a Mennonite, and he went to China as a missionary, and then he got involved in business. And he was importing to the US hand-drawn Chinese greeting cards, I remember. And this is like when we were still, this is like 1979. So the point is, again, you got to be careful. You got to check, your statements, because China began developing long before the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. China began its economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping by the late 1970s. And then they did some other things. Like, for example, China got into, the US is all pissed off, collectively speaking, because we lost the Vietnam War just a few years earlier. Then communism appears to spread in Nicaragua and elsewhere, and Carter's being all blamed, and inflation is getting bad. The economy is not doing so well. The Shah of Iran is overthrown. Then the Iranian revolutionaries seized control of the U.S. embassy because they think the U.S. is going to try to put the Shah back in power through the CIA. And so they seize the embassy and they hold American diplomats hostage for 444 days. And Carter tries to rescue them and fails. And we're all humiliated. And then China attacks Vietnam. China attacked Vietnam because Vietnam had invaded Cambodia, communist Cambodia, because communist Cambodian government was abusing the Vietnamese population minority living in Cambodia. And China attacked, and Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge was allied with China, and Vietnam was allied with the Soviet Union. Vietnam invaded Cambodia, occupied the whole country, got rid of the Khmer Rouge after they killed like 1 million people under Pol Pot. And they put this guy Han Sen in power, who's still there, who's still the dictator ruler of Cambodia. And China punished Vietnam by attacking Vietnam. And this, I remember, because I was in high school at this time, and Americans kind of like this because China's now screwing those Vietnamese after they humiliated us. And China's going to be our friend against the Soviet Union. China. And so they were able to appeal to American frustrated nationalism as America restarted the Cold War. This is even before Ronald Reagan became president, January 1981. And then Reagan just built on this further, American, and he was able to beat Jimmy Carter in the election in November 1980, and he became president, and he played with it even more. And and China became basically a de facto ally. Communist China became a de facto ally of the US, and all of these American companies began investing big money in China. And US said, yeah, that's great, And nobody really complained too much about that until Barack Obama started talking about pivot to Asia. That was about 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Everybody was focused on 9/11, 2001 attacks, right? And then Donald Trump made that a big focus of his presidency from 2016 to 2020. And it goes beyond who's president, because now, and a realist would say, yeah, of course it goes beyond who's president, because even Joe Biden he's not dismantling what Trump did to China. He's continuing to, he hasn't removed the tariffs that Trump put on Chinese imports. He's made it a little bit easier to get around them, but they're still there. He's talking about China being a problem. He's talking, and a realist would say, yeah, I told you, there's deep forces at work that have to do with this desire, particularly of nations, for influence and power, and they want to keep it, even if they don't know why they have it. The Soviet Union is gone. You can say the Soviet Union's been gone for 30 years. Containment doesn't need to happen, but the Americans they like being number one. And China is emerging, and they don't like it because their influence is decreasing. American influence is decreasing. But again, if you're going to make that argument, you have to have evidence. You have to find, it's same with through me. I have all sorts of bright ideas, but I have to prove them, right? When I write. And so the first thing I do is I got to, look through the literature and try to use keyword searches. I do a lot of keyword searches on library databases and things like that. I think I showed you this right in class, right? When I say you have to use scholarly literature, what's going on with that? Let me go. I just wanted to show you, what I typically do. There's a lot of good databases out there, and I don't.
Is Google Scholar a good one?
Well, yeah, you can use Google Scholar. Yeah, Google Scholar attempts to provide material that is peer reviewed. Yeah. So but that's free, and anybody can access that. To use what I use, you need to have a library subscription. So if I go to share screen here, like for example, this, I was reading a newspaper. So if I go like basic search here, and then I click here, peer reviewed means scholarly. That means professors, anything that you find when you do keyword searches that is peer reviewed means that it's gone through the peer review process to be approved as an academic publication, which means it's because anybody can post anything on the internet. My 14-year-old nephew can post on the internet. Just because on the internet doesn't mean it's academic scholarly. You click here, and that means peer reviewed. So, if I look up full text hegemon and full text US and full text Soviet Union, put in quotation marks because it's 2 words, and full text realism and full text, Morgenthau, whatever. And, you click here and it goes spin, 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 spin. 107 results. Realism is tragedy. That's going to be another, a realist statement. Power is transition, balance of power, the rise of China. A theoretical reflection about rising great powers. Here, this is a Chinese source from Hong Kong. And you can look. I want to. Relevance means typically though you want the most recently published thing. So you can go here, most recent first, and see what comes up. So. Socialist paternalism or socialist realism, state survival versus ideological goals as motivating factors behind North Korean diplomacy towards other socialist states. And this is from North Korean Review. I don't know what that is. Theories of international relations, role of values and power, blah, 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 blah. So that's what I spend, a lot of my time doing. But you don't have to do that. You just need to use the textbook. Yeah. Since we want people to, learn the material in the textbook. So, you got to get the basics down. And the likelihood, and so again, what you sent me is typically like a first draft. You got to get your ideas down on a piece of paper because you got to think about what it is you're trying to say. Then when you write them down, you can begin to clarify and refine and develop them. So what you've done is you've written down your ideas. Now you got to find evidence in the book. And I provided all those notes, right? I went through the book page by page and I rewrote out everything in the book in my own words, as well as with my own comments. So you can use keyword searches to, all of those notes that I've been posting to find what you want. Look up hegemon on my notes, do keyword search on hegemon, see what comes up. I can do it right now. I have the one file which everything was posted in, if I can find it here. I don't know, we're almost out of time here. So let me just do this screen share. Make that share. So if I look hegemon, do a keyword search under hegemon. And let's say I want to look under my US foreign policy class. So you can see there was notes in chapter 11, that word hegemon pops up there. I don't know where you have your notes in chapter 3. There's a reference to the word hegemon pops up there. Chapter 2 in the notes, the word hegemon pops up there. Okay.
We're still allowed to use the notes from the previous lectures instead of like the ones.
Oh no, you're right. That's right. Yeah, from the first. That's right. The final exam is. You can use the previous notes, but make sure you're using site information of at least 3 chapters from chapters. What did I say? Chapters 7 through 12 or whatever it is.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And So let me see, because I have another student coming at 3:30. Do you have any questions? Make sure I ask. If not, I just keep talking here, but I just want to make sure you have a chance to ask a question if you have one.
Question. No. I think question-wise, I think I'm good. I think I need to revise.
Yeah, I know. So you have this here. Okay, yeah, this is a journalism source. And this is this is a newspaper. It's called what we used to call in high school a newspaper of record. Mm-hmm. Although nobody, everything's electronic now. In other words, it's considered to be like an accurate journalistic historical record. And, I use that too, but that's not considered a scholarly source because this is a reporter who's got to submit reports by deadline to his editor or her editor, and the editor has to review and approve it. But it's not a scholarly peer-reviewed source. A scholarly or peer-reviewed source is a source for which like when I write something, it goes, my name is removed from something that I submit to be published for consideration for publication. My name is removed and it's sent to two people I don't know, who don't know me, who don't know who I am. And they go through and they rip it apart. And then, and you're supposed to be a tough guy when you do that, because I have to do that sometimes too. And then, it's called a double blind peer review. I don't know them and they don't know me. So I could be Henry Kissinger, but they're not supposed to know it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, I mean, you can use Barnes, but you make sure you're using site information from, what did I say? Chapter
11.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah, okay.
Final exam, go through here. Yeah. And I said, chapters 7 through 12. Yeah, 7 through 12. Okay, that's it for today. I'll send you this this paper here, because I made just a couple changes or a couple suggestions. I don't know if I did actually, but just in case, I'll send it to you. So go like this, and go like this, and go like this. Attach the file. Go here. Go to US Home Policy. Go here. Go like this. And here it is. And then I'll send you the link to this video recording. Okay.
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 Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.